Good morning.
Good morning.
Mark Bailey. Hello there, Aoife.
How are you?
Back again. This is the second of our videos. We're doing this in conjunction with Gear Up TV, and we're just trying to inform members what's going on in the world of business aviation. We're really fortunate today. We're discussing legal issues, and we've got Aoife O'Sullivan, who is also our chairman, may I add, of the Air Law firm. I just wanted to ask Aoife, first of all, how are you coping with this distance working?
Perfectly well, to be honest. I have tended to work from home quite a bit anyway, so it's not a massive change for me. Probably the biggest challenge is having the kids at home full time.
Yeah,
homeschooling is. I have a very healthy respect for teachers and their patients. It's not easy, definitely not easy. But no, otherwise it's fine. I mean, aviation as an industry is international anyway, so most of the clients of ours would be internationally based. So, you know, it doesn't really matter, just so long as you get the work done. They don't really mind where you are.
So from your point of view, the partnership and the company has actually just dropped into a normal mode of operation in a way, and it hasn't disrupted you too much?
No, I mean, there's, of course, the lack of face-to-face with the team, but what we do now is Zoom calls, a bit like this. And that's just a way of, to be honest, it's nothing more than just catching up with the team a couple of times a week. Just find out if anybody's got any issues or what they're all working on. So that's working fine. It's not as good, obviously, as being in the office all day together. But, you know, there is all that extra time. I mean, my commute is about an hour and a half each way. So that's an extra 3 hours I have in the day now, which is obviously very helpful. But yeah, I mean, other than that, we're fine. We shut the office, actually, I think it was about a week before the official lockdown, just because we were all, one of my children is at risk. So I was particularly concerned. So everybody's been working from home. We had to get everybody set up, so laptops and printers and all the usual. But yeah, everybody seems to be working perfectly fine. A little too fine, to be honest. I'm expecting a lot more requests for home working from now on.
At least they're not working without you, and you don't feel redundant. So that's
exactly. Yeah, I'm still mildly important. At least I think so.
One of the things that you cover quite a broad spectrum of aviation. What type of things have you had to deal with in the last few weeks for your clients?
Gosh, it's been quite a wide range. Probably the majority of the work is around moratoriums, restructuring, force majeure. We had a lot of issues with valuations. So basically the valuations were published and showed up to 20% drop in value on aircraft, and that has an immediate knock-on effect because the banks have the right to make what's called a margin call. So they basically say we have a loan to value of whatever it is, 60, 70, 80%. And if the loan to value drops, so in terms of the exposure is greater for the bank, they're able to call for cash. So they did that to quite a few clients, and they were fairly awkward conversations because the client's response was, well, I'm glad you called because, you know, not only will you be not getting the 1 million you're asking for, but can I have 6 months break on paying the lease rates? So yeah, they were interesting discussions. To be fair, and I mentioned this to somebody recently, is to be fair to business aviation, that the majority of the banks, all bar one or two, all responded very positively. And my suspicion is that they were so well set up in terms of sensible loan to values. They had kept an eye on the valuations on the aircraft. They weren't lending at 100% like what had happened in the last recession. So they're able to write it out with the clients. And I know the clients that they are being lenient with massively appreciate it. I mean, it's a real tick for reputation in terms of how you handle yourself in a crisis, and I'm seeing that in spades. What else there's quite a lot of restructuring, as you would imagine, on the commercial aviation side. The airlines are suffering. So it's just trying to handle them through that and basically trying to avoid insolvencies and getting them support from the government and getting them support from their leasing companies. We have had cases where the airline has been basically said, look, I just can't afford to pay you. So what do you want me to do? So that's been a lot of the work. Force majeure, it's something you learn about in law school. I honestly could write a thesis on force majeure now. It's one of those clauses in a contract that doesn't get an awful lot of attention, but clearly it should, because it's being relied on quite heavily. What we are finding, and certainly a lot of the work we've done on it, is your financial woes, unfortunately, aren't a good enough excuse to be able to call on force majeure. So it's not enough to say I've run out of cash and it's not my fault, therefore can I stop paying you under the lease or the loan? Mainly because, for one thing, leases and loans don't tend to have force majeure clauses in them, and it's a principle. At least it's not a legal principle. So it has to be written into the contract. If it's not in the contract, then there is no such thing in that relationship. And the loans and leases tend to be hell or high water contracts, which means that, literally hell or high water happens, you must continue to pay. Where you do see them, and the COVID-19 experience, the word pandemic would have to be included, or something similar, to be able to show that the basic concept being, I literally cannot perform my obligations under this contract, and it's not my fault, and it's something that's completely beyond my reasonable control. Which, when you think about things like moving aircraft, so if there is an obligation on a seller and a buyer, the seller has agreed to move the aircraft to the States for an inspection. And, typically a purchase agreement will set out exactly when that must happen. Sign the purchase agreement, and then within 10 days, you agree to move the aircraft. The force majeure argument in that is, well, it's physically impossible to do that. We're in lockdown. There are restrictions on airport access, and it's even difficult to get pilots these days, to be honest, because not only are they not able to fly, but they don't want to be stuck in a quarantine country, which is fair enough. I mean, there are a lot of countries where simply landing there puts you into a 14-day quarantine. And is somebody willing to pay a pilot 14 days sitting down route? So they're in. It is an argument. It is definitely worth a discussion. But what I'm actually finding, and what I've said to a lot of clients, is, everybody's going through this. It's a great leveler to some degree, because everybody is experiencing problems, and it is better to approach your counterparty, assess what's going on, assess the relationship, but where possible, you just need to work together as best you can, because heading into difficult litigation at this point would be a disaster for a lot of businesses. They're already under too much pressure.
So where that's happening, and sort of both parties can see that there's got to be a different path, are you actually having to write side letters, or how do you cover it technically to make sure that if it's 10 days or a month going on, how do you cover that?
Well, we amendment agreements, basically, or side letters. We have had the difficult part of this is it's impossible to predict when it will all end. I mean, we have had aircraft transaction, a sale transaction. We were acting for the seller, and the buyer asked to extend the closing date until a date, the later of whatever date, the end of July, or when these 5 countries open their airports again and allow access into these 5 countries. And his thinking was that basically, if I'm going to buy this aircraft, then they're the places I want to be able to fly to. That's where I do my business. There are ways of doing it, but it's just difficult. I think what an awful lot of these counterparties want to do is basically just suspend it all now. They don't necessarily. I'm not seeing an awful lot of disputes in the sense of that they're trying to pull themselves out. It is far more a suspension, which is good news for the industry, to be honest. How long that will last, I don't know. It does tend to change every week, so there's a kind of a cycle going on. 2007, 2008, the litigation started pretty quickly. The disputes kicked off pretty quickly, but around that time, it was Q4 that year, we had about 9 transactions on the go, and every single one of them terminated with the buyers pulling out. And it went into litigation very quickly because they were fighting over deposits. Mm-hmm. And who should be entitled to the deposit, who's actually at fault. Whereas I'm not really seeing that this time. It's far more people just agreeing to extend the closing dates or agreeing to give each other time. And I think everybody's just hopeful that this will all end soon and we can get back to normality.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've picked up another interesting point from some of our members, and something maybe we didn't expect to see, a firming of interest in aircraft, yeah. And actually a desire for some transactions to go through. I just wonder what you found.
Well, exactly. It is a little bizarre, to be honest, because I had a client the other day who is not experienced in aviation, doesn't do aircraft transactions, but is interested in coming in as a financier. There are a few players out there. We've seen a few fairly rude offers for aircraft, 50, 60, one of them was nearly 65% off the value of the aircraft.
Right.
The answer to that was pretty swift. But that there are a few players, but the transactions aren't stopping. It's more the logistics of getting a transaction done. So, when you go to buy an aircraft, ideally you'd like to see it yourself. You'd like to do the visual, check the interior, etc. They are using technology to try and do that, but it's just not the same thing. We're in the process now of trying to move an aircraft across to Canada because the buyers are in North America and they know that they can at least get to Canada. So that's the kind of thing you have to do. And then, the inspection facilities, a lot of them have suspended services because the engineers, the maintenance guys are all out on home quarantine. So that's another logistical issue. Then obviously getting the crew, we mentioned earlier, actually just getting people to fly the aircraft. And then as you go through the process, even if you've gone through all of that, come out, the aircraft's fixed, it's back, it's airworthy again, and released to service. You then typically have to find a delivery location that suits both the finance, the tax, and the legal needs. And that tends to involve flying the aircraft again to another location. So that's our biggest problem, to be honest, is just logistics. It's not so much the legal side, it's the logistical side of getting the transaction done.
So given those limitations, have there been any that have actually been taken to conclusion then?
Yeah, they have. The ones that were in process that have been released to service already, we've done that. It's a little tricky from a tax perspective because typically in the States you have what are called flyaway exemptions. And what it means is, as soon as you've changed title on the sale of the aircraft, then you have typically 10 days to fly out of that state, or else a tax will be imposed. So it's working with tax advisors in the US on that and getting workarounds because, if you complete your deal and you want the aircraft to just stay put for a while you figure out what you're going to do next or where you're going to bring it to, sometimes 10 days just isn't long enough. So yeah, they are completing. They're taking longer. It's certainly a slowdown. Where you would get responses within the same day, or even typically within the same couple of hours. I'm just seeing a real slowdown in responses and people committing to moving on with the transaction, which can be a bit frustrating, to be honest. But no, I think it's still going, and I think that's the positive side. Is it is still going. It's not yet getting ugly, and I really do hope it doesn't, because I think right now this industry just needs to hold it and hold it together, keep it together.
Yeah, in your discussion, you mentioned book values earlier on, and initially we were seeing a little bit of a fright in terms of book values and reactions. But equally, I've seen people that have been getting offers on their aircraft close to what they may want. Any idea of where it's going? Are we in a bit of a cycle or anything?
It depends on who you talk to. I mean, the valuations are done on the back of actual transactions. So it's you need transactions to be able to give a genuine valuation. My personal view is, without the transactions happening or closing, then how can you? You're just guessing. You're just guessing that, well, in previous events like this is what happened. So we're anticipating the same curve. The thing with the hole in that argument is that basically this is unprecedented. We have never had something like this. The 07-08 global recession was for completely different reasons. It was a stock market issue. SARS didn't affect the world in the same way as COVID-19 is. So this is unprecedented. So it's very hard to say or to agree with the principle that, well, we think there should be a 15 to 20% knockoff aircraft valuations, even though those transactions have stopped. And even though, we're not able to base it against real figures. And as I said earlier, the problem we have, certainly the clients are having, is if the valuations continue to be issued anyway, and we keep seeing a downward trend in the values of aircraft, it impacts not just owners of aircraft, but it impacts on the business of the financiers. Are they now at risk because they've too much loan against an aircraft that's devaluing quickly, or more quickly than they had anticipated? I think it's a problem for the OEMs. Obviously, if valuations are falling heavily, then there's a lack of confidence that follows from that. But it also means that people who possibly were sitting on the fence in terms of buying an aircraft are very unlikely to proceed, while there's a downward trend. So I think we need to be careful. I think the industry really does need to be careful. And I think there's a genuinely good argument for saying, suspend the evaluations. Let's just wait and see what actually happens because what none of them seem to be able to answer is, well, if you estimate a 20% loss in value and then it turns out you're wrong, how do I get that back? If I had to give the bank the $1 million because of your 20% reduction in value, am I going to be able to get that back? Very unlikely. So you're back talking to the banks again and saying, well, they've adjusted it and we're now back up 15%. So there are a lot of knock-on consequences, I suppose, is my point, that need to be taken into account.
So really, we've got to be careful we don't talk ourselves into a corner.
Precisely.
When it really isn't necessary.
Exactly. That's exactly.
Look, a different angle, and you sort of mentioned it there. Do you see there being an opportunity for business aviation as we emerge out of this? We've heard of different models, different curves, but what do you think it could bear for us as a community?
I think if one of the consequences, I suppose you have to look at the consequences to see the opportunities, or to see, where the angle would be. I mentioned yesterday actually on a call that I would make my way towards the airlines if I were a big operator. because they're really struggling. And the European Commission have issued a statement that they anticipate putting the airlines back to 66% tax load in May, meaning that you must fly your aircraft, but only with 66% of the aircraft full. And over 60% tends to be where they just about start to make a profit. Everything up to that is cost. So they're basically being told, fly at cost. I think that there has always been a good argument for business aviation to tie up with the airlines and support the airlines, whether it was for protecting, but typically it is to protect the first class passengers and the business class passengers, but also to open up the routes that the airline doesn't have access to, whether because of they don't have the slots or they just don't have the capacity. And I think if you start looking down the line of where the airline industry is going to go, if the airlines do start to go under, and if we do start to lose some of them because they're under so much pressure, they're hemorrhaging cash right now. If we do start to lose them, then there's still a demand. There's still people who need to get to the various locations that the airlines previously serviced. So I think that that's an immediate opportunity for business aviation. The fundamental problem, of course, is cost, because it's more expensive to fly privately on a corporate jet than it is to fly business or first. But I'm pretty sure there's enough smart people in our industry to be able to work out a way of doing that. It has been tried before, and this concept of, in private aviation, you sell the aircraft, you don't sell the seats. You're not allowed to. It's a regulatory issue, but there must be ways of finding the people, grouping them together, and sending them off. And service that flight. I think that there's a lot of people who think business aviation will expand exponentially because of COVID-19. People are unlikely to want to climb into an A380 with, how many hundreds other people. I'm not as necessarily convinced on it. I do see the argument, and I do see the whole, people wanting to protect themselves, not wanting to go into the major hub airports. And that's exactly what business aviation gives you, is you're not surrounded by thousands of people and exposed to all of it. It's whether you can convince the business class and first class passengers across and keep them in business aviation. Whether is that something that's just going to be a very short term while the confidence comes back or while the airlines come back, or is it something where we can actually convert them across and into the industry, which would be ideal.
I think that's a really important point, because some of the modelling I've seen, that people are talking rather about a V or a U, they're talking about a W for our community, and it's how long that first bit is while we help out that premium traffic, and whether we retain any of those, we really don't know, but it feels like there could be an opportunity by taking that as it comes.
Exactly. I'm seeing in the airline industry that, interestingly, a lot of the aircraft have been converted to cargo planes. One of my clients told me yesterday that he's heard you can basically charge about $1 million a day on cargo deliveries at the moment, which is pretty good work for your 737-800 or whichever one you've converted.
And a lot of them have got the dispensation so that you can net in with all of the seats and carry stuff on the seats as well as what's in the hold. So it doesn't even take a big cargo conversion to get some of this moving. So,
exactly. But again, that's short term. That the business aviation community is more about medevac, but it's a fallacy to think that you can suddenly convert your Challenger 350 into a medevac equipped aircraft. It's very costly. It has to be purposely adapted. So I suppose the issue for this industry is, well, what do we do if this continues, or how do we keep our operators going? How do we keep the maintenance facilities up and running? And frankly, a lot of that is going to have to come back to government support. And it needs to be government support before the businesses go under. You know, we can't afford to let these people go under. I suspect there'll be plenty of opportunities for consolidation. I think we'll probably see a few mergers. But, you know, the question is when. You know, I suppose fortune favors the brave. And if you're going to do it now. You know, get that first mover advantage, get ahead of your competitors, and get it done. Because I think waiting until it's too late and you're struggling, obviously that's not a good way to go into negotiation.
No.
So I suspect it's going to be an interesting few months. What I would like to think is that, you know, the majority of this industry will be able to survive and will be able to cope.